Had a hard time with the notification. Oh, yeah, it's not going. That's annoying. There it is. There it is. Lord help us, Tampa. Oh, All right. Well, while we wait, if you're watching this later, we have a Discord. The Discord is right there. There's a link pinned to the live chat. There's also a link in the description of the video. It's free. It'll always be free. And I mean, it's just good. It's just good. So go. Do the Discord thing. Mayor. The mayor of what? Forever Redeemed Dave. That's a long name. That's a long one. Surprised they let you have that one. TikTok, go to YouTube. You're gonna have a hard time. You're not gonna be able to see anything, which is it's just a lower quality experience, I would think. L said, "Hey Joe, why the channel change? By the way, love 13 and 14. Paul's sarcasm really hit the spot for me. Never read it like that. Yeah, I'm telling you, some of the stuff, it's like, it's just you have to know, and then once you know, you read it in a totally different light, and it changes a lot. It changes a lot, and it goes for so much of the New Testament specifically, but a lot of the Old Testament too. Like tonight is one that I feel like kind of sheds a lot of light on things that you probably haven't thought about before, but the New Testament specifically. It's more personal, I guess. A lot of it's more relatable to to you as a person, more so than the Old Testament. But anyways, to answer the question, we changed the channel because I got demonetized on the other one, and I've been talking about doing a different channel for a while because YouTube has been heavily bogging the last channel. So it just felt like a good time. It seemed like, perfect timing. They demonetized it. They've been emailing me for a while, telling me they're hiding this and they're hiding that and whatever. So it was fresh start is really all. Fresh start. Let's try again and see what happens. See what happens. I think it'll be better long term is the short answer. The other channel, I disappeared for 4 years, which really hurts like you and the algorithm. So this one's new, it's consistent. We're doing the same stuff at the same time every week. So I'm hoping the algorithm eventually picks it up and sees it as something that is reliable, and it knows who to push it to because it's the same thing all the time. I probably would have thought Paul was a big ol' a-hole if it weren't for you. I mean, he kind of was. But honestly, like he had good reason to be the way he was. I couldn't imagine like going through everything Paul went through just to be shunned by the churches that you've literally been stoned for. It's rough. He's got every reason to be a bit upset, I feel like. TikTok, go to YouTube. All right, so here's the thing. We're not doing 10. I put it on there in the thumbnail and in the title, but I lied. And here's the reason why. I did put it, if you look in the Discord, if you go down to study discussions and you go to Genesis discussion, it's right here. So what this entire section is it's genealogy. Okay, which isn't a bad thing, and I feel like it's something we should talk about, but it's a lot. And it's a lot of the same, just over and over and over. But it is important. So I added it to things to do at the end of Genesis. But it's a solid hour at least of just running through this if we're going to exegete it, which I want to. So I'm ready for it. I've got everything together for it. I want people to have the option, honestly. So once we're done with Genesis, we'll do some of the stuff that you guys put in here of things you want to revisit and like go deeper on. And then at the end of one of those times, we'll do Genesis 10 in great depth. Because you have to really want it. to be able to make it through. It's just rough. So we're skipping 10. You don't lose any actual context whatsoever, because that's literally all that it is. But if you're a student of the Bible and you care about these things, it is important and it is really interesting. So we'll do it, but I just didn't want to force anybody into it. So we'll come back to 10. We miss nothing. 11 picks right up to the next section that actually matters. So we're going to jump in on 11, and then we will revisit 10 later on. Chuck Missler, is it on Genesis 10? The name meanings. Yeah, they're important. It, if nothing else, like the geographical context is the most important, in my opinion, out of 10. It paints a very broad, but also very specific picture geographically of kind of the who, what, where, when, why. It's just not dreadfully important in terms of the actual storyline, and I don't want to spend an entire hour in the middle of the stories going over it. But it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. Alrighty. All that being said, picking up on 11, everybody's favorite, the Tower of Babel, which is interesting in and of itself. So now the whole earth had one language and the same words. This is just almost certainly not true. It's a great story. It could certainly be true. But when they're saying the whole world, they're talking about the Near East. That was the whole world in context. They're talking about the Mediterranean whole world, the Near East whole world, not the entire globe world or flat Earth, depending on where you lean and where you land with that. But that's the actual context, is the whole world that they are aware of, that is pertinent to them, and that is actually encompassed in this story. That's all. Not everything. Not everything. That makes it more complicated if you do that. And then you get into shady areas of trying to make that work, and it doesn't work. So whole earth of the Near East, of the Mediterranean world, which makes a lot more sense, had one language. This is also likely just not true. We have no reason to actually believe this. There's plenty of other literature outside of the Bible, outside of Judaism, that confirms this is not true. It's just one of those things. The one language is talked about in other literature, but it wasn't the same. So right there you have a conflict, because it can't be two languages, but one language. And it can't be four languages, but one language. And there were others, right? And then everything that we have, like research-wise, everything kind of shows that we can't prove that there was this single language that all humans spoke, and that all of the languages that exist today were pulled from that one single language. On the contrary, we have a lot of evidence that shows there were many different languages, and that what we have today is kind of derived independently to different sectors of the world from those different languages from the start. There's a lot of evidence for that. So this is one of those things that if you want that to be literal, you're going to have a hell of a time making that work in reality. It's one of the honest moments where you have to say, I'm not going to live in delusion. So if I really need to believe this, which is fine, like that's your prerogative, you have to figure out how to justify that without being delusional. And maybe you can. Otherwise, you have to say, what are other reasons? Perhaps it's just not literal. Perhaps it has a different meaning. It could be 100 different things, and I'm not going to push my own beliefs on anybody, but that's kind of the truth of it in the opinion of most people. Where should I post the genealogy commentary video? I feel like you could put it. That's a good question. Can you make your own thread in Bible study discussion? You should be able to. You should be able to make a new post and then just title it. The study discussion area is like open forum. You guys can do whatever you want in that. The ones with the little TV icon, those are going to be video archives that you shouldn't be able to post threads in or like new posts in. You should only be able to reply to. But in study discussion, you should be able to post a new thread. Yeah, that'd be good. I'd like to watch it. I think it was literal, but the sequence of events were flipped. I think the dispersion is what caused the languages to diverge. Possibly. Possibly. It's just one of those things like trace back other cultures to a similar or same time. What does literature outside of the Bible depict? And then you could still say all of it is wrong. That's an option. But you'd have to kind of make that definitive decision to say these are all wrong, or they're lies, or they're counterfeits, or whatever. You just have to justify it somehow. As usual, I don't care what anybody believes. It's just something to consider. Whereas I believe most of Christianity is just told, no, it was the whole earth, when we have no reason to actually believe that. And it was one language, when it's hard. It's hard at the very least to make that concrete and to make it literal. Moving on. One language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So this was post-flood. If you're thinking like timeline, this was after the flood. People began to move. Whereas like prior to the flood, there wasn't a whole lot of moving. If you think back and remember, they were kind of settled. They were more of settlers. Whereas now everybody's kind of shifting. They're becoming nomadic. They're off out and about. From the east or eastward. This is why this is confusing. So, and as people migrated from the east, if you pull this in Hebrew, it can go either way. So it could read from the east. It could also read eastward, which would be to the east. So it becomes somewhat confusing. Luckily, context as you continue on adds some clarity, but not a lot, because a lot of these geographical locations, we're guessing where they were. Like all of scholarship is guessing where they were. Some we know pretty sure where they were. Some you'd get all kinds of different answers about where they actually were. Does it matter really, like big picture? No. Geography for the most part, unless it's something for some reason personally you put a lot of weight in, it doesn't really change anything theologically. It doesn't really change anything about like the core tenets of the faith. It's just one of those things that if you care about the things you want to know, you'd like to have a clear picture, and it just doesn't always exist. And then it mentions this specific geographic location. This is Babylon. It's where it was. There are different terms geographically for it, but it was around Assyria, and these are names that don't show up in a lot of the other literature of the time, which is what makes a lot of this very difficult, is that a lot of these places, they do not show up in other Mesopotamian literature anywhere. So they seem to be specific names that this culture used that other cultures did not use. Whereas other geographical locations and other just things in the Old Testament, we're able to kind of look at other literature, like other Mesopotamian literature specifically, and say, okay, they're corroborating what the Bible is saying about this here. So we know with a fair degree of confidence that this is accurate and this is what they're talking about. Many of the places don't show up anywhere else. They're in the Bible only. And then some of these things will show up in Egyptian literature, which also corroborates. But then you have to think, well, why wasn't it in any Mesopotamian literature? Or did they just use different terms to describe the same thing, but they're so different that we're not able to kind of connect them at all? I'm curious as to what the other literature says during that time. It's something you should definitely look into, because there's a lot of it. Specifically around, we've talked about it a bit, but specifically around the creation stories. There's a lot of other literature, and a lot of it corroborates the important parts, I guess is the way that I would say that, which is a very plain way to say it, but it corroborates the things that are or could be seen as possibly more important. Memphis, what? York, the same New York? Or Memphis, Tennessee, the same Memphis, Egypt? Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, possibly. Honestly, the geography in the Old Testament is really rough. It's really, really rough. There's just not a lot to help, in my opinion, outside of the Bible. There's just very little. There's very little. It seems like names were changed intentionally on a lot of them, which is why a lot of people believe they're made up. I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm saying it's a pretty popular belief that a lot of the geographical locations, they were just kind of made up. Either because they didn't know, but they wanted to add the detail. I mean, you could think of a dozen reasons as to why they would make it up. Doesn't mean the story's not true. There could be valid reasons for changing names or adding a name that wasn't in the actual text or whatever. But it's tough. Either way, it's tough. It's especially tough if you want to geographically pin all this stuff down and say this is exactly where it was, or this is the, even in a lot of this is the region that it was. It's hard to say. And you'll a lot of different commentaries will give you a lot of different answers. It's one of those things. It's very, very hard. Verse 3. So they're migrating east or from the east, depending on the way you translate that from Hebrew. They found the plain. This is Babylon. The land of Shinar is Babylon. And they settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone. And this is tar. This weird word is tar. For mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. There's a lot there, because you're getting kind of like a preview as to what's going to happen later. So the brick for stone and tar is what they're saying in a word that we actually know. And tar for mortar. It's a depiction of what they were able to do, if nothing else. If you think of like what we've read so far to right now, this is more of an advanced building technique. So we've made a bit of a jump, and there's just not a lot to account for it. And this is why it's not a linear thing. Like reading through this Genesis is not perfectly linear. We're not being told everything that's happening. It's not complete. Therefore, it's not literal. Or it could still be literal. But we're not getting the full literal picture. This is more advanced, doing this type of building, from what we've been accustomed to prior, which was basically nothing. This is advanced building techniques for the time period. It's an advanced technique. And if you look again in Mesopotamian literature, it clicks. It adds up. There is corresponding information that says this is true, which is great. It's great when we have that. Then they said, this is where we get into some of the depth of it. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heaven. One thing to keep in mind is that all we ever talk about is the tower with Babylon. It's the Tower of Babylon, Tower of Babylon, blah, blah, blah. What else though? It was an entire economic system. It wasn't just a tower and some huts. From what we can tell, it was a relatively advanced economic system in a society. And so there were other things there too. But what they're talking about doing here is building a tower. And what the tower is actually a temple. And we know this also from Mesopotamian literature, because the word that is used in other literature to describe what we're translating as tower is built to other places. They're all temples. So they're building a tower, aka a temple. It's one of those words. Tower can be interchanged with city or temple. Temple. So I would push temple only in this context. But yeah, that's true. I would push temple only because they're talking about both. So it would be like saying, let's build a temple and a temple. It's the only reason, otherwise, yeah, it's one of those things. It sometimes it's hard to translate. Here, I feel like they made it clear enough for us. They're talking about not only the temple, the tower, but also a corresponding city, an economic system that is also there. Then they said, with its top in the heavens, and we're going to get to a degree of irony happens here shortly. Top of the heavens, just remember that. The temple goes to the top of the heaven. The heavens is where God resides, right? At least that was their contextual understanding, is that in the heavens, God exists. Just remember that. They want to make a name for themselves too. So this was, and that is That's a good translation for it. Is they're trying to do something that is above what has been done. They're trying to cross a threshold and do something fantastical, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Again, whole earth is the Near East, not the entire globe. 5. And the Lord, or Yahweh, came down to see the city and the tower. There's your irony. So they built a temple to the heaven, to the top being in the heavens. However, anthropomorphically, the Lord still had to come down to see the city and the tower. It's one of the things that maybe just aggravates me a little bit, and I'm sure everybody else just looks right past it. But it's just funny. It's just one of those like funny things. We're trying to make a name for ourselves relate to the concept of Hashem. Why do you say that? I suppose, though. Oh, he beat me to it. Moses. Oh, I missed this. Moses, or whoever wrote Genesis, is writing the story in hindsight by several thousand years. Right, which is why it can be problematic. I guess I'd just say that. Doesn't mean it's not true, but it can be problematic. It can cause things to become difficult, at the very least. I'll wait for you. When they were trying to create... Yeah, possibly. I don't know, though. I think you have to stretch a little bit, but it would also make sense. At least to a degree, it would make sense. Were they trying to create a God? It's a theory, for sure. Personally, I don't know that I subscribe to it. I think it's one of these ones that like you can read into and you can make some other things make sense, and they very well might be true. But it could also just be as simple as it is. But it's tough. It's tough. So ironically, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that were in the heavens, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people. They all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there. Let us go down and confuse their language." This we talked about earlier in Genesis. We're going to talk a hell of a lot about it in Job. This is Yahweh talking. Come, let us go down and confuse their language. I don't remember what chapter it was, but it was early on in Genesis. Who is us? This is Yahweh talking. Who is us? Who's he with? We talked about it then. I believe some of you said like, well, it's Jesus and the Father and the Spirit. Possibly. Possibly. Tough in my opinion to go that route, but definitely possibly. In the Old Testament, the majority of the time when God speaks as we, it's the divine counsel is what it's called. That's the most common, I guess, way that it's depicted, is the divine counsel, which in Job kind of lays out. I agree, not the Trinity, but a lot of people go that route with it. Elohim. Job goes into great detail on this, or at least the greatest detail that we get. When we get kind of a picture of almost God like at a conference table with other beings of some kind. We don't get a lot of detail on that, but we get a bit of like a picture of the council, that there is some kind of divine or heavenly or spiritual, whatever word you want to use, council that is around God or involved with God to some degree. And in the Old Testament, this is common to get let us, plural, not singular, us go down and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from over the face of all the earth, moved them around, which is what they said, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Then God did it. And they left off building the city. They stopped. Therefore, its name was called Babel. Babel, there's like two things here, but it's to confuse. That's where the name comes from. Is to confuse, which is the result of what happened there. Deuteronomy 32:8. Let's see. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of sons of God, but the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Yeah, there's a connection, for sure. At least the things that I have connected, yeah. The sons of God. Here, hold on one sec. Let me find this. So Yahweh scattering them. This dispersal will eventually result in the fulfillment of Yahweh's command after the flood, but at a terrible price. I'm reading something, by the way. This event is central to understanding how nations came to worship other gods beside Yahweh, who had created them. This is where Yahweh shifts from focusing on all the people of the earth to electing Israel. There's that word that some people don't like. In a sense, the Babel event marks Yahweh disowning the nations of the world as his human family in favor of electing Israel, whom he will also use to reclaim the nations of his people. This is actually, I'm really glad I read this, because this is a great point. This is where this begins to happen. Is we move away from this this all-encompassing humanity where God is pouring into humanity, and it turns into God pouring into a very specific group of people, not humanity. Which theologically and practically become interesting when you get to the New Covenant, the New Testament. Because then people argue it flips back. So all of a sudden, for some reason, God cares about all of humanity again. And then on the opposing side of that, you have Calvinists who don't believe that. They believe what is being said here and what is literally happening here, which is where God does elect a group or individuals as a part of a group. And in the context of Israel, it's the group in and of itself. They are elect as a group. In the context of the New Testament, what Calvinists believe is that individual people, not specifically part of any group, are elect. And that those people are, the shining light that God has. And everybody else is screwed. That they are elect. It's the whole Romans argument. In the Old Testament, you can't argue it. It's absolutely a fact. God begins to ignore all of humanity other than Israel. Is really it. It doesn't mean he doesn't show favor here and there. It doesn't mean that he doesn't show grace here and there. He does. But it's not even comparable. It's very obvious that there is a specific group of people that now are the apple of God's eye, and that's it. Everybody else, all of humanity, is on the outside. So then, it's just something to think about later, is that the new covenant comes, Jesus comes. Did that actually change back to all of humanity? Or are the Calvinists right to a degree, possibly, where there are elect, and God isn't involved in all of humanity? It's just something to think about. I'm not stating anything at all. I'm saying it's something to think about, and that is all. The language changing didn't happen overnight. They changed because of the splitting. YouTube cut it off. It's so annoying. The change because of the splitting. It took generations. Right. I don't think there's any reason to believe that it was like immediate. Which is how you justify the idea, right? Because if it was immediate, there's nothing to correspond with that. If it was very slowly over generations, then you could kind of make it make sense. In like a realistic context, you could make it make sense. The way it reads goes, one would think it happened immediately. I would say most people believe that. The problem is, good luck justifying that. Like in the real world, using research, using historical documents, good luck making that work. It's really difficult because there's just nothing to back it at all. And there's a lot to say that it's not true. There's a lot to say it's absolutely not true. But yeah, I think most people are taught that way, Ruth. I think that's most people. I think most Christians are taught that. I believe most Christians are taught that there really was one language, which I personally think is really hard to make work with history. But Ghost disagrees with me. This is like the whole thing. We can all disagree. I think it's really hard to make it work. And then I think most people are taught that after it happened immediately. And I think it's equally as hard to make that work. But it's also like, if you think about it, it's the things we were all taught that nobody ever asked a question about. You didn't ask a question in Sunday school or on Sunday at church because you can't. You were just like, oh, okay, got it. I don't have any reason to not believe what you're saying. So I guess that makes sense. Go said every nation was a garden and assigned gardeners. And Yahweh took Abraham to start his own garden. Gardens are just metaphors for cultures. That is true. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so the Lord dispersed them. Therefore, its name was called Babel. Babel is to confuse. So it makes sense. Because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. The Near East, the Near East, the Near East. There's no reason to think it was more than that. In my opinion. Now, Shem's descendants, we're not going to read this because it's extremely repetitive. If you care, read it. But there's not a whole lot. And when we come back to do 10, if you guys decide via a poll that you want to come back and do 10, which is just a genealogy lesson, we'll add this in there. So we'll come back to that. Terah's descendants, same thing. So 12. Beautiful. We're doing great. The Bible means what it says, and it says what it means. That's what I kept hearing. That is so dangerous to me. That's fine, but whose interpretation? Is it you, Ruth, me, and Ghost could all read Genesis 12. And depending on what I know about biblical history, what Ruth knows about biblical history, and what Ghost knows about biblical history, where did we learn our biblical history from? What seminary did we go to, or what online resources did we use? We'll still likely come up with a different interpretation to a degree. It's not always going to be true. But anytime there's something that's not concrete, which is most of the time, we're going to come up with different things. So then the Bible means what it says and says what it means. By whose account? By what translation? By whose historical backing? I think it's so dangerous, those types of things. They're so dangerous. To me, it's like that's how they're controlled. That's how I was controlled when I was first learning about all this. It's like the Bible says you can't question the Bible. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not questioning the Bible, bro. I'm questioning you. I don't trust you, baby girl. I don't believe you. I don't think you've done the research. I think you're just parroting what the last dude told you, who told you that you're not allowed to question the Bible. And then I went off down La La Land for like 8 years. The call of Abram. Who is Abraham, in case you don't know. Now, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Abram is the son of Noah, baby boy Noah. Many generations prior, like we're down the lineage here. This is also like one of the examples where the communication between God and people begins to shift. Just the beginning. God has had a lot of direct contact with humans. Speaking, showing up, coming down from the heaven to the city. Like, we've had a lot of that. This is the beginning of the threshold where that begins to shift. There's still a ton of it. But it's where that whole thing, in my opinion, starts to slow down. It's like this is the first step to just the pace beginning to slow. It still happens quite a bit, but it begins to slow. 2. Actually, no, this is important. So go from your country. He's telling him to leave. He's telling Abram to leave. You are going to move on. Abram is in, he's near Mesopotamia, just north. That's where he's departing from. So he's living north of Mesopotamia. He is now going to embark out of that area. And I will make of you a great nation. That is children, right? Like that was the promise. That was one of the promises, was that Abram or Abraham will have almost magical children, because Abraham and his lovely, beautiful wife were in they were not the age to have children. Like everybody who's been to Sunday school knows at least enough of that story to know that. Big miraculous thing. But this is the beginning of that promise where I will make of you a great nation, meaning you will have many babies, and I will bless you and make your name great, so status, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse. This is also theologically important. God is promising, it's one of the promises, that whoever, I'm going to try to say this delicately. I don't want to upset, but it's important. Like theologically, in my opinion, it's important. This is a part of what we were just talking about, where like the dynamic between God and the people begins to shift. This was not the way God really dealt with things prior. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse. He's choosing Abram, and anybody who's not down with Abram, God will essentially smite. That is new. It's a new behavior, or it's a new interaction than what we've been taught so far. Make of it what you will, but this is the beginning of like, these people are important, these people not so much. And if these people over here who are not so important happen to have an issue with my people who are important, I will curse them. He's picking and choosing. I don't care how it makes you feel. Like, that's the Bible. And that's like, it's something we don't talk about. It's straight up the Old Testament in its entirety. We're on chapter 12. It's here. We're down with it now. Notice the ages of the patriarchs after Peleg was born. The ages get wild, right? 430, 207, 209, 403, 119. Yeah, it gets wild. A lot of it does. So God's picking favorites. It is what it is. It doesn't matter how we feel about it. I can see this being taken out of context these days, though. In what way? So Abram went, meaning Abram left where he was north of Mesopotamia, and he is going forth, and essentially he's obeying God, is what they're trying to express. As the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, north of Mesopotamia. And Abram took Sarah, right, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired at their home, basically, in northern Mesopotamia. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Keeping in mind, like, where is Canaan? Where is that? We know it's near the sea. We know that. That's one of the ones where like there is corresponding literature to say that is true, that it is near the the Mediterranean Sea. It's near the Mediterranean Sea. And also near the Jordan River. We know that. But it's also kind of a collective way that we meaning like biblically, we've chosen to describe like a certain area where a certain group of people came from, which would be the Canaanites. And that gets down like a whole different rabbit hole, so I guess maybe I'll save it. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. And I'm sorry, hold on. 12:3 can be out of context. I mean, of course it could be, yeah. Like, to use it personally, I guess, is like probably what you're saying. Here's the thing. You don't get to, and not you, but like nobody gets to apply Genesis 12:3 to their life. Nobody does. Nobody. That's delusional. The text has nothing to do with us today. The text has nothing to do with our religious affiliation whatsoever. In my opinion, I guess I should preface, it's delusional to say Genesis 12:3 could be applied to my life. I see that as like very diluted. Very diluted. Modern day Israel, West Bank, Jordan, and parts of Syria and Lebanon. Right, north of Lebanon and Syria. Did you say that? Modern day Israel. Yeah, so from my understanding, it's north of what we know as Lebanon and Syria. It's near the Jordan, and it's near the Mesopotamian Sea. The rest of what Scott said, I don't know. But I'm sure that's true. That's not in my head, but I'm sure that's true. Abram represented the beginning of God's law, so anyone who shuns God's law will be cursed as a consequence. Naturally, I think that's what it means. It's saying there is a correct way to live. Possibly. It's like it's one of these things that maybe as we continue to point it out, like that might work in my opinion. That might work now. It doesn't keep working. I don't think, because this is the first of many where true, like I don't disagree with any of that, but I don't necessarily think like that answers for it, because what's being said in 3 is said a bunch more times, and I think it will be very hard to keep saying like, oh well, it means this about the law, or it means this about, like, maybe true, but God's also deciding certain people are less important than others, period. Abram is more important than somebody else or anybody else who happens to cross him in this context. And if it was a one-off, then I would never say any of that. But it's like, it's the beginning of many examples of God saying, you are important. You are at the very least less important because this person is so important. And then in the greater context is like, this group of people are important. And basically anybody who's not them is less important. I think it's really hard to get away from that. It's really hard. In my head, it's impossible because it's just so thick. It's so thick. With like favoritism is not the right word, because that's not at all what it is, but it's the modern word that would make people understand like the concept. Israel was the favorite. In this context, Abram was the favorite. But I don't disagree with anything Go said. Like, all that stuff is true. Applying it today is out of context, for sure. Applying anything from Genesis is out of context, in my opinion. It makes no sense at all. Like, using them as motivational quotes or whatever, fine. But applying it to your life just doesn't make any sense. But what part was Cain in it when the author wrote this text specifically? I believe what Scott says is true. The problem, like, we don't know the other words. Like, modern Lebanon and Syria, there are ideas of what they were called, but the geography is so mixed up. And there's words that don't exist in any other literature. And there's words, like we kind of talked about it earlier, I think, before you got here, Rodriguez. But it's really hard to make a lot of the geography match up. Thou shalt not murder, and all the other 9 are timeless. I mean, I don't disagree. So Abram went, land of Canaan, blah, blah, blah. Where were we? To your offspring, I will give this land. The Lord appeared. Sorry, that's important. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Reiterated. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going towards Negev. Abram and Sarah in Egypt. Okay, perfect. Getting into some hot stuff here. So just mentally prepare yourself. Kind of like sports. There's key specific. There's key players. I'm having a hard time reading tonight. There's key players for a specific time and specific season, not necessarily favoritism. What's needed for the play to happen. 12:7 is Jesus Christ. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. You're gonna have to explain that one more. So he built there an altar to the Lord. You're gonna have to explain that one more. Unless you're not talking about Jesus Christ. And maybe I'm completely overlooking what you're actually trying to get at. Yeah, explain that more. Yeah, Yeah, maybe. But does that apply every time we use the word appeared? But just keep in mind, I'm super cynical. So that's just the way my brain reacts to that. It very well could be. It very well could be. But it just seems to me like it seems like a reiteration because it's happened so many times already. So why would this one be different? I don't know though. Like I'm not the arbiter of any of this stuff. I don't know. And I'm a total cynic, so I'm not the best one for like the out like the more I don't know, is esoteric the right word? Like esoteric or kind of it's just I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy. To me though, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, and then it continues on, an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Like I feel like we've seen that so many times where they'll start with it and then they'll end the sentence with it too. So maybe that's made me cynical. And maybe I'm missing something like that where the appeared to at the end is trying to represent Jesus Christ. I want to be open to it. Genuinely, I do. Because it makes it more interesting, if nothing else. Like, it makes it more interesting. It makes me want to care more. But I just don't know. I don't know. I'd be interested. How about this? In Hebrew, is it a different word? That would make me more interested. I don't know that. I don't have it up right now. But if appeared at the beginning of 7 in English is a different word in Hebrew than the appeared at the end of 7, I'd be more interested. And then maybe I change my mind or be open to the idea. So if anybody cares to look, you could do that. All right. From there, he moved on to the hill country. We already read that. All right. So we're Abraham and Sarai or Sarah in Egypt. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was severe in the land. The famine that was happening, just like as the greater context, is the reason that he goes to Egypt. Like that's the driving force, that's the push, is that the famine was so bad that Abram and friends had to go that way. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, because it's easier, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Who's his? Then they will kill me, Abraham, and they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. Here's the thing. I don't like this at all. And maybe it's just the way that I am. And maybe it's unreasonable. But Abraham is telling Sarah to lie and say that they're siblings. And the insinuation is that, and commentators will say this. I know because I read one today. Commentators will say that perhaps that lie isn't so bad. And so Abraham and Sarah won't feel like they're lying because in a sense, they're still related or they're still have a family tie of some kind. I find that ridiculous. It's a lie. A lie is a lie is a lie. I don't really care how you spin it. That is a lie. I found it so funny when I read in a commentary today, this guy tried to justify Abraham lying or proposing that they lie about their relationship. I thought that was hilarious. What a wild thing to do. Lying to evil is a good thing, Go said. I don't know about that personally. But at any rate, Sarah, my sister, why? Because Abraham will be killed. Sarah won't be, and we'll find out why here in a second. So actually, I won't spoil it. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the prince of Pharaoh saw her, that is who he was in the earlier verse. When the prince of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. That specifically means that she was essentially pulled into sex slavery, is what that is. The woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. This was the old word, and I guess like Vegas still uses it, a harem, right? So she would have been pulled in to be a part of that type of lifestyle. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkey, male servants, female servants, these are slaves, female donkeys, and camels. Not slaves like are in your head today, though, but biblically, that's what it was. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with a great plague because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife. This, to me, makes no sense whatsoever. This entire section drives me personally absolutely insane. So let me get this straight. Abram and Sarah decide to lie and say that they are brother and sister so that Abram can live. Either way, Sarah's going to be taken into some form of sex slavery or a harem or whatever you want to call it. That's going to be the outcome. But at the end of all of it, what is this you have done to me? The Pharaoh says, why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her for my wife? So God punishes Pharaoh, who was tricked into thinking Sarah was the sister, when it sounds like Pharaoh wouldn't have taken her if they would have told the truth about who she was. This is one of those ones. I don't know how you explain it. I don't know how you make it make sense. I don't know how you... I don't get it. I don't get it. Ghost says my logic is sound. Is it the logic of lying? 1 Kings 22. Hold on. Let me get it. I have always just hated this story because it just makes God look terrible. Terrible. Punishing Pharaoh for being tricked. Like, dude, punish the people who lied and tricked the person. Did my Nazi comment get blocked? Yes, it did. I can't see, and I can't even see it. Why can't I see it? I should be able to see it, but I can't see it. Ghost put 1 Kings 22:22 in there. It says, by what means, the Lord asked, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all his prophets. He said, you will succeed in enticing him, said the Lord, go and do it. Specific direction. I do not agree that you can apply that to everything. I have a major moral problem with that. Major moral problem with that. I do not believe personally lying is ever okay unless it's a means to protect someone who is innocent or something that is innocent. I personally cannot justify lying in any other situation at all. Morality is morality. I think we just begin to justify it, but that is just my personal opinion. I just can't live with that personally. But the King's verse it's a specific directive at a specific time. That's my interpretation of anything like that. I don't personally believe you can apply that to everything. But just like anything else, you land where you land with it. And I definitely get like the draw. I get the theory. And there was definitely a time in my life where I absolutely agree with that. You could lie, you could do whatever you want to somebody who is evil. I lived that way for a long time. I just personally can't live with it anymore. And maybe that's like a personal bias thing. And maybe I'm wrong. And perhaps it's something I should look into. That lying spirit was for a specific purpose. I assume you meant the lying spirit was for a specific purpose, but thy lying spirit, like the King James way that came out, was much funnier. So I'm glad that it happened. I don't give a crap about the lying part. You can never justify sex slavery, especially selling off your wife. Well, she was a sister in this scenario, right? They lied and made it sister. Here's the thing. Lie, care about all of it. Care about all of it. The lying is bad, in my opinion. The sex slavery is definitely not great. Bad thing. Not a good thing. But you guys are missing the whole point that aggravates me, so I'm going to try to explain it again. Theologically, this is troubling. It's troubling. It doesn't work. Abram and Sarah lied. They tricked the Pharaoh so that he took her into sex slavery and let Abram live. Then Pharaoh gets punished by God because he took in the wife of someone that he didn't know was the wife of someone. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's problematic to me. So the only way I make this work is this is not an actual, this didn't literally happen. Otherwise, like this, who is God? What is God's character? God punishes people who are tricked, who didn't know they were doing something wrong. I struggle with that. I have issue with that. That's not in alignment with what the rest of the story teaches about who God is. Not this story, but the greater context story. It's problematic. But also, it's not the only time. So you have to be able to make it work multiple times. And this is why I'm kind of saying, like, this is where it starts. God begins to do things to people for not always a good reason. Or at least with what we have from the text, not a great reason. Or a reason we don't know, which is what the Calvinists say. Just because you don't know the reason God killed that 8-year-old doesn't mean he didn't have a good reason. I take issue with that personally. Leviticus 19:29. I guess we could do Leviticus. Do not profane your daughter by making her a worker of the night, lest, I'm just trying to not hit keywords, so please don't come at me for that. Lest the land fall into workers of the night and the land becomes full of depravity. I tried typing my comment twice and it's not posting. YouTube's AI is erasing my comments. I'll try a word. Yeah, I mean, yeah, try to like format it differently maybe. Or send it one word at a time. I wonder if Abram was punished and it was omitted. Possibly. I don't know. It's like one of those things theologically I've always had an issue with. But it's one of many. So it's not like this is a special case. It's one of many that theologically I've had a very hard time making work and making make sense and making it cohesive with the other attributes and characteristics of God that we know about from the Bible, from the Old Testament, but specifically from the New Testament. Once you get the full picture of the way God behaved in the Old Testament, the way he interacted with humanity, and then you get to the New Testament, and it is a stark contrast. And I know people disagree with that, but I don't see how you do. It's a stark contrast. And there are large academic texts that do nothing but talk about the contrast. And it's there. It's apparent. It's phenomenal is the word for it. It's phenomenal. The contrast is phenomenal at times. TikTok, you guys need to go to YouTube. I mean, we're done for tonight, but you can't see the scripture. We have it on the screen. And the people over in the YouTube chat are lovely. So on Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time and on Sunday at 6 p.m. Central Time, go to YouTube and get off TikTok. You guys are just staring at my face. It's not that great. Same. I also have issue with it. It's just hard. It's hard. And then it becomes like one of several things. Were things omitted from the text that would add more clarity, like you just said? Or do we misunderstand the interaction that God had, the behavior that God actually exhibited? I feel like it's one of these things that we're laid out a very specific image of who God is in our like even going back 20 years. In the modern age, we're given this very specific picture of God. And then if you actually read the Bible like we are, you sit down and you pick it apart for hours at a time, you find it's not quite the picture that they gave you. Even in the New Testament, it's not quite that picture, much more so in the New Testament, but not in the Old Testament. God was kind of brutal. God was kind of brutal. A lot of stuff happened. he it's just interesting. It's one of those very interesting things. And then when you try to make God of the Old Testament cohesive with the representation of God and God of the New Testament, it's not always an easy thing to do. And so that's what interests me, is hearing people talk about that. How do you justify it? How do you make it make sense? If they're one and the same, okay, well, they're not. They're not. You can say that all you want. They're not. What is depicted in old is not the same as depicted in new. You can say that as many times for as many years as you want. It does not make it true. Anybody who reads this stuff knows you're lying. They know that's not true. So you need to figure out how to justify it. Like the teachers, the pastors, you need to figure out how to justify it. You need to figure out how to talk to people about it and make it cohesive. Because any of your congregants who are actually reading the Bible truly they know you're lying. They know it's not that simple. At the very least, it's not that simple. And at worst, it's just not true. But it's on the spectrum somewhere between not that simple and not at all true. And so it's like it's the teaching world of Christianity. It's their responsibility to amend that and make that make sense. I just tagged you in off-topic Discord screenshots of all 3 versions of my comment. Oh God. All right, is it safe to put on here? I don't care. I'm gonna put it on. Okay, there's some things on the screen. Catch them while you can. I'm not gonna read them out loud. I mean, so fair, but this aligns with what I said. This aligns with what I said. If you're lying to protect the innocent, I think it's a good reason. If you're lying to an evil person for no reason, I don't believe it's justified. Does that make sense? If I meet an evil person and I have no reason to lie to them, I just decide to lie to them, I believe morally I have made the mistake. I have messed up. But if I'm lying to an evil person to protect someone from being harmed, I have no problem with that. Because they did the wrong first, or they had the intention to do wrong first. But if I just lie to people who I think are evil, just because, I don't agree with that. But all of your examples, I agree with that. We're on the same page with that, for sure. For sure. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up. There, Thursday. Uh-oh. Well, I was going to pull something up on Discord, but now it's not loading. We start Adam and Eve on Thursday. All right, I'm going to have to restart this. So I'll show you guys this later, but I found a few reliable I'm finished vetting the Adam and Eve texts. They're good enough. They're good enough for what we're doing. I can't see now, but if anybody put any other sources in there, I'll look, and I'll look through them this week. And if they're better than the ones that I found, then we'll use those. But as long as we have something to read that's relatively reliable, we're square. But we'll be reading the conflict of Adam and Eve is one thing that it's called. It is the same thing as Adam and Eve 1 and 2. First and second Adam and Eve. The conflict of Adam and Eve, first and second Adam and Eve, it's the same thing. 90% of the time. There is 10% of the time where they're not the same thing. Which is why this all kind of gets hard. But we're going to read the majority of what the majority accept as their cohesive. My response in this case, it is not applicable. I hope we can at least agree on that. Historically, many theologians put some of the patriarchs of the faith on a pedestal of perfection, and it's simply not true. Justifying wrong acts like this is dangerous. There must be a distinction. Well, I think the protection is a distinction. It's similar to, like, I would never physically harm somebody unless, like, they were going to harm my family. Context is literally everything. Yeah. But I know there are people who believe in, like, no, if your wife is about to be beaten to death, you are not allowed to do anything at all. You have to sit there and watch because pacifism rules all. I do not agree to that at all. At all. I think it's our responsibility to protect the innocent, whoever that might be. Even if that is someone that I don't like. You protect the innocent and you protect truth. Truth is truth, regardless of anything. The truth is the truth. Pastor says, okay. Okay. All right. I can't get it to load on Discord. So if anybody put a different source in there, I'll look at it this week and then I'll I'll post the definitive source as an announcement sometime before Thursday. But it'll be available online. It'll be totally free. And I will have it on the screen like always. So you don't have to have it if you don't want it. I will show it. We'll be square. It's going to function very different than this. Just because I'm going to be incredibly careful about adding things to it. I want to just raw read. And then if we want to stop and talk about anything specifically or look into something, we just need to like understand there's a lot to go off of when you read the Bible. There are thousands of sources to look through on any given verse in the Bible. In the Apocrypha, it's different. And the sources that are available are questionable at best. So in my opinion, it's better to just raw read it and then have conversations with people about it. I'd be way more interested in how you guys interpret something out of 1st and 2nd Adam and Eve than I am about somebody's commentary on it, because they're rough. I've read them. They're rough. They're questionable. I feel like it's a waste of time. So it'll be much more like free flowing, read the stories and then talk about them. Less of me like doing exegesis while we read. Just to be super, super clear. That's my proposed approach. Numbers 22:22, Yahweh calls himself Satan. Being an obstacle to evil is a good thing. I agree with that, but it's still contextual. It's still contextual. In my opinion, it's still contextual. But yeah, it should be good. All right, well, everybody, have a lovely night, and I will see you Thursday, and I will post an announcement with the definitive choice of text that we're going to use for the apocryphal text of 1st and 2nd Adam and Eve, also known as the conflict of Adam and Eve. It's really good. It's super interesting. TikTok, go to YouTube next time. But I'm glad you hung that long. The YouTube name I will put in the chat. Here you go. You can go to YouTube right here. On Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Yep, 7 p.m. Central Time. We're going to read an apocryphal text, which is not a part of the canon, which means it's not in your normal Bible. It's something that throughout the history of Christianity, they decided was not inspired by God. We personally don't care. We're going to read it anyways. It doesn't mean we're going to believe it was inspired by God, but it means that it adds context to the other stories that we do believe are inspired. Therefore, it is important. And so we're going to read it. If nothing else, it's super interesting. So I highly recommend you get there. You guys are lovely. All right. Love you guys. Have a good night.